Today, we have an awesome interview with Austin Robey, who is the co-founder of MetaLabel and Ampled. Both are DAOs and co-ops working in community-owned businesses. And Austin's been working in the world of co-ops for a long time. And I invited him on the show after reading an article that he wrote for FWB that was all about what co-ops can teach DAOs and what DAOs can learn from co-ops. What are the pros and cons of co-ops and DAOs, the history of co-ops. And that's a lot of what we discuss here on the show today. He shares the background of co-ops and its roots in civil rights and agriculture. And he shares his work in going from co-ops and experiencing the challenge of fundraising for a co-op and making it financially sustainable, which is interesting because there's so many parallels between co-ops and his experience with what community managers deal with trying to get budget within Web 2.0 companies, within venture-backed companies, and the difficulty for community-centric companies to monetize and find a financial exit. So this conversation was amazing. It just opened up so many new ideas and questions, but also new understanding around what it really could look like for a business to be community-owned, community-led, and how it can become sustainable financially. So for those of you who are interested in co-ops, who are curious about DAOs and Web3, who just believe that businesses should continue to move in the direction of community ownership and being community-led, you're gonna have a lot to think about after this one. All right, let's dive in. Austin, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's good to be here.
So yeah, we've been seeing each other around FWB and Seed Club. Have you been involved in both those communities for a while?
I've been involved in Seed Club pretty early on as a member of the second cohort. So right now they're on the fourth cohort.
Mm-hmm.
So I, with a team representing Ampled, a platform I helped start, we were in Seed Club exploring a community token model. And that was like starting about a year ago today. So like February 21. And actually currently in the fourth cohort now with a new project called MetaLabel.
You're the legal one?
Oh, no. No, MetaLabel is like a cultural collective. With Yancey Strickler, the co-founder of Kickstarter, on the founding team, and Rob Keelan, who started Etsy, and Anna Bulbrook, who's from Toxic Airborne Event, and TED Music. So a really cool group of people in this fourth cohort. So I guess the joke is that I have this very hyphenated role, and I show up, and no one knows whether I'm showing up as an alumni or like a community member or like an active participant. So definitely
advisor.
Right. So I'm a believer in the Seed Club community. I think it's just such an interesting accelerator model,
Totally.
Thinking about ownership in interesting ways. So like if there's time to prioritize within communities, Seed Club is filled with really thoughtful people, I guess, including yourself. It's in the Discord. So I've been Seed Club for about a year. Friends with Benefits a bit more recently as like an official member, and have contributed a bit like with their editorial side, writing articles.
Right, which inspired this conversation, your article on co-ops and DAOs, which we're going to really dive into. But I'm curious, how has your experience been in FWB so far? I've been a member for probably 6 months, 4 to 6 months, something like that. But like it's so much more established. I feel like Seed Club is still so new that maybe that's why it's been like relatively easy for me to get plugged in. But FWB is like such a mature community in some ways already, and it's pretty large. What's your experience been?
Yeah, it really is mature in a lot of ways. I just continue to be impressed by how thoughtful the group has been about transparency, governance, all the interesting tools that they're building, and and programs and events that they have going on, like really fostering a sense of belonging, IRL events as well. So I really appreciate and respect the team there, and I really think that Friends with Benefits, I think, doesn't get enough credit for like the ways that they're operating. I think particularly if you look at their snapshot where people are voting on things, and they show every single month like budgets and actuals, and I think it's a really good use case for people to look at of how engaged a collective community like that can be. And if you go, to events in the private Discord, there's a really high attendance of people there. So it's very engaged, cool people. And so, yeah, I do think that it's often overlooked, and I appreciate what they're doing.
Yeah, as you're talking, I think what I'm realizing with FWB is that it is so advanced for a DAO, for the state of DAOs overall. Like, they're pretty much at the forefront. And there are so many things going on. There's like lots of different projects with budgets and votes and different teams and squads, which, like, for someone who's new can also be very overwhelming, because like I joined and I'm like, wow, I have no idea where to even plug in. There's so many different lines and channels and teams and conversations to be a part of and groups. So it's almost like maybe it is, if for a DAO that actually does become more mature and starts building out a lot of the systems and processes that we talk about, it's hard to be a passive community member like you would in other like interest-based community groups where you're just talking about a topic or something of interest. Like, you join FWB and you get the weekly newsletter about everything that's happened, and it's just like, it's like you're working at a company pretty much, right? Like, when you join a DAO as like an owner and a member, you're basically joining as like a contractor or an employee in a way for a company, and like you really have to immerse yourself in it, or else it's easy to just kind of get lost.
Right. Yeah, you could be a kind of passive member, or what I think is interesting is the pathways that people could become more engaged or active if they want to. And yeah, it definitely seems like a group, or maybe this is just like an emerging trend. It just kind of defies easy categorization for a lot of people. The articles that I've seen written about them never really seem to get it right. I think it's like, people may pejoratively pigeonhole it as like a digital Soho house, but you could easily just as look at it like an artist cooperative just as much, or like this really novel experiment in collective governance. So yeah, it's definitely interesting to be a part of it, and I think that it's very cool, and I like seeing it grow and continue to mature.
Totally. All right. Well, we're going to come back to FWB, I'm sure, as we get into some of these topics around DAOs. And I like to try to define all these things for everyone who's listening in case they're new. So FWB is Friends with Benefits. It's probably the largest or most like mature DAO that's out there. A DAO is a decentralized autonomous organization. So it's a organization that's owned by the community and governed by the community, at least in theory. We're going to talk a lot about DAOs on this. And Seed Club is an accelerator for DAOs. I think the first of its kind, and something that Austin and I have both been involved in. I've been advising a bit, and Austin's now a batch member number 2. And they're up to their 4th batch now. So really cool community. Highly recommend you explore both if you're interested in DAOs. But Austin, why don't we start with like your background a little bit more, because you have a really rich history of experimenting with co-ops before this whole concept of DAOs was even around. Now you're getting more and more immersed in DAOs. And one of the inspirations for this conversation was the article you wrote for FWB about what DAOs and co-ops can learn from each other and kind of the pros and cons of each. So we're going to dive into that here. But why don't we start with your background and how you came to be involved in this space?
Yeah. I think there are many different entrance points to land in kind of like this community focused Web3 subculture that's very interested in collective ownership and like emergent forms of people and kind of like new forms of human organization. Um, for me, I was a long time crypto skeptic. That person still lives inside of me, to be honest.
Samesies.
Uh, and I guess what started this path was first co-founding a project called Ampled, which is a Patreon-like platform for musicians that was organized and formed as a cooperative. So that means a platform that's collectively owned by its users and workers, with one member, one vote governance. So this idea was something that I first learned about through kind of academia, which is in New School and University of Colorado Boulder. There were people like Trevor Scholes and Nathan Schneider, which were writing about this idea called platform cooperativism, which is like such a mouthful. Like, that it's like it has some academic influence, and it's just a very compelling idea. I think as a response to gig economy work, I think the precarious kind of creator economy work, where so much of our lives is an economy, is transitioned to these platforms that we don't own and seek to serve extractive venture capital investors. So the core idea is just taking what is like an older, more brick and mortar, at least in perception, idea of like a cooperative, and applying that to a tech platform. So an example would be like Uber owned by drivers,
Right.
or Airbnb owned by hosts, or Instacart run collectively by the personal shoppers or delivery cyclists. And yeah, just found this idea really interesting. And me and some people, Colin Lewis, Ryan Deshawn, we initially started building Ampled, and we're thinking about ways to approach it a bit differently. Neither of us had really worked at a traditional startup before, so we had, I think, some advantage of like less to unlearn, and just kind of had a critical lens from the start, asking like, why are companies for sale before they start, or like why is this kind of sequential rounds of funding, seed A, B, C, D, towards very rigid ideas of like an exit, which is either like selling to another company or going public. These seemed like very limited paths for something that we did not feel like fit that. And we were interested in like creating a structure that was inherently trustworthy, not just like trust us, like as people. And so it landed on this idea of ownership. So we were thinking about, how do we share ownership? And after kind of like exploring many different mechanisms and ways to think about this, which is surprisingly difficult to do, we just landed on the idea of it being a cooperative with zero investor ownership, which introduced a lot of other questions of like how to even make it work, how to finance it, how to build it. And I think like so much of that ended up being like a community first approach of us kind of like raising our flag and being like very honest with some of the challenges, and then people coming and saying, I want to help build this with you. So, it also like instilled a lot of trust within the team as well. There wasn't this sense, as there might be at other kind of like startups while they're in the early stages of formation, of who's getting more equity, like who's going to get a bigger payout, like who's getting paid what. it really just was kind of like this definancialized labor of love from the beginning. And I think that for everyone involved, it just felt right to us.
You still have to figure out who's getting compensated for what, though, right? And like who gets how much ownership and what that ownership means. Like there's still questions around that. It's just different incentive structures and different context than a venture-backed company.
Right. Yeah. I think, the cooperative model is flexible, but it's also very simple. Like one of the main key defining characteristics of a cooperative is one member, one vote. So, we did have to create bylaws from scratch, and really we went through this learning process together. And I think in the end, it was just it was about making sure that it was simple and egalitarian, and that's just what felt right. And no one in the end was doing it for financial gain. So we really treated it more like a passion project that we just really wanted to see in the world and wanted to see it exist.
Right. Is that true of most co-ops, or are other co-ops more financially driven than that?
Oh, I think, no, there's, the idea of a cooperative is not mutually exclusive with larger or successful businesses. We were just realistic about the challenges of building a two-sided marketplace tech platform while being completely excluded from venture capital. That's a severe handicap in our instance, and something that we'd like to see solved. And one reason why I'm attracted to the idea of DAOs, I think it's a better way to potentially resource collective organizations like this than traditional meat space legal ownership, which is very limiting sometimes.
Right. And to define that one, meat space is one of my favorite terms in crypto. Meat space is just IRL, the real world, not the metaverse.
Right.
So are co-ops not able to fundraise from VCs?
Well, there are many different flavors. That you can have a cooperative with an investor class of shares. At Ampled, we chose not to do that in favor of simplicity. We really wanted to say, without any kind of asterisk, that this platform is owned by the artists and workers together.
Okay.
And yeah, so I think there are emerging creative ways of bringing in investment, but at the same time, realistically, investing in a cooperative, it's going to be harder to extract more value or get venture level returns for an investor. So an investor in, say, an arts cooperative would have to be considering other bottom lines besides a fiduciary return. So that's obviously a challenge, that severely limits kind of the pool of people that would consider pulling money in. And
why
grants,
is that? Why can't a co-op be acquired or IPO or something?
Well, that would just completely change the nature of ownership. I think at a core level, it's the reason why you start a cooperative is different from starting a traditional company, where its intention is to serve people's basic needs, is to serve a utility and have an ongoing use case value rather than a transactional value. So it's less about creating value for ownership and selling it, and more of maintaining a kind of shared utilitarian good. I think often it's if the market isn't going to build it for us, then we'll build it for ourselves. Is kind of the pattern that a lot of cooperatives follow.
So they're kind of things that may not have the same market incentives, or there's no reason for someone to build it because it's not going to be a big company. A co-op can build it because they're not actually trying to have some big sort of financial outcome. It's really just we want this thing to exist, and this is a system that could potentially allow us to have it exist sustainably.
Yeah, right. So like as an example, in the 1940s, a lot of rural America was gained electrical power through electricity co-ops, and these were areas that like traditional larger energy companies didn't think were profitable enough to serve. So it's an example of people just coming together and building something for themselves when other people won't build it for them. So it's like it's a model that kind of is born out of necessity and like survival and self sufficiency often.
Yeah, you talk a little bit about the history of co-ops in your article and in your interview on Seed Club as well. And its background, it has roots in civil rights as well, right?
Well, there's, a lot of people associate co-ops with like a hippie grocery store. Often,
Right.
you think of businesses that are smaller in scale, people sitting Indian style in a circle, making slow decisions. But there's this really interesting book by Jessica Gordon-Nivard, a professor at John Jay College, which kind of like connects this like deeper American history through African American roots of where kind of like a lot of cooperative principles actually emerged. And kind of like solidarity networks and economic coordination. So, and these are ideas that have existed throughout history in every corner of the world. So it feels like an important side note just because this is like a kind of like a shared idea space that DAOs have emerged from, or at least share a lot of considerations with. So, part of the purpose of that article is just like connect the dots so that there's like historical context in the work that DAOs are doing. Like economically coordinating with each other, creating solidarity networks to serve and benefit each other's needs. And it's just examples of that in history, which like go way before any kind of like tech thinking of solutions.
So starting to go into DAOs a little bit. There's and actually before that, there are lots of examples of really big co-ops as well, right? Like so it isn't just a local grocery store. Like we got Rainbow Grocery here in the Bay Area. It's like one of the ones I think of, but REI is a big example of a large, well-known co-op that's like a really big multi-billion-dollar company, right? Are there other co-ops?
Mondragon. Like Mondragon is like a kind of example that a lot of people point to in Spain, like $1 billion large cooperative. Some of the examples that I think are interesting are examples of this done in a platform context. Stocksy, based in British Columbia, they are a cooperative platform of stock photographers that collectively own a stock photography platform, and they like are a well-established, running, profitable company. There's also Savvy Cooperative, which is a healthcare data cooperative owned by patients. That's a very fascinating model to me. And yeah, I mean, I live in Brooklyn, and there's Park Slope Food Co-op here, which I believe has over 30,000 co-owners, and was particularly resilient during COVID when I think there are a lot of challenges for grocery stores. So yeah, there's at least enough data to point to businesses that are cooperatively owned being more resilient during downturns, in the medium and long term being more profitable and being able to pay employees better. It's a fair question of like, why aren't there more of these companies? But I think we're still in this kind of like post Cold War haze where these models aren't even taught in business or law schools.
It's true.
and I think that there's kind of like this Cold War hesitancy still of like promoting ideas that even resemble like an alternative to traditional capitalism.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, even at the beginning of starting Ampled, I went to the Brooklyn Public Library, to the business section, and wanted to check out all the books that I could on cooperatives. And there was nothing. I mean, there were two books in the like old, not very helpful books in kind of like the archives in the basement. And it just goes to show that like, the challenge, like they're harder to fund for sure, but once they're like going, are incredibly resilient, strong businesses that serve great needs. And so, yeah, I think a lot of the challenges are just not having more examples, or it might just be like a lack of education. Like no MBA is coming out right now learning about cooperative models as like an actual kind of like choice or like an option for creating an organization.
Something tells me that's going to change soon. Interesting. So starting to look into DAOs and where the crossovers there, if one of the core principles of a co-op is that it's not driven by some big financial outcome, it's not driven by an acquisition, it's not driven by like the value of shares necessarily. People who are in it to create this shared utility. And if you're working for it, you're getting, at least a base income, you're getting a salary. How does that jive with the world of DAOs, which in some ways model similar concepts to a co-op, but have a huge amount of financial incentive tied to it, whether or not you want it to, right? Like one thing I've talked about recently is FWB is an example for me. Like I joined it to learn to be a part of a DAO, to like kind of figure out how this stuff works, but it costs 75 tokens to join. That costs $8,000 to buy those tokens. And that token has halved in value since I joined. So whether or not I joined for financial reasons, like in order to participate, I had to take that risk, and that risk ended up costing $4,000 to $5,000, right? So now connecting co-ops to DAOs, co-ops, fundamentally have this belief that it's not about some sort of financial outcome. Like by its structure, it cannot have an acquisition or an IPO because it would change the entire model. And so people who are in it to create the shared utility. And the financial outcomes for people are just like you get paid by the co-op if you work for it, but there's no like shareholder value really, right?
Yeah, I would say mostly that categorization is true. There may be some minor other kind of like contrary examples, but yeah, I would agree with that.
Okay. So my question is for DAOs, which at least in narrative are embodying a lot of the same values and goals of co-ops, how does that align or misalign with DAOs also being so financially driven by ownership of tokens, value of tokens? FWB is an example for me where like I joined FWB with no intention of it being a financial investment. I just wanted to learn, be a part of the community, participate, but it still cost $8,000 at that time to buy 75 tokens, and that token price is halved. So now I'm down $4,000 to $5,000 on that, investment, whether or not I looked at it as an investment. So like for me, it's I'm trying to figure out if it's possible to kind of separate those two when looking at DAOs, or yeah, I don't know. I guess what's your take on that financial element of DAOs? Does it impact its ability to function in the same kind of way as a co-op?
Yeah, I think that the FWB model is probably unique to FWB and isn't necessarily how all DAOs would work that have kind of like a pricey buy-in.
Mm-hmm.
Like one of the DAOs are such an emergent form that like don't have a clear definition now. So it's I guess it's easier just to kind of gauge off of patterns that we've seen in the space so far. I think because cooperatives are one member, one vote, it avoids some of the issues of whales having outsized governance power, or people purchasing power that are outside of the organization. And I think that when it comes to financial speculation, my sense is that there probably is kind of like a Goldilocks happy medium where there is a way to allow people that support an organization to do that, to like buy in, to kind of like support a mission that a particular DAO has. And these what I think is interesting about like token-based models or token-based ownership is that it feels like a really interesting way to bootstrap some of these networks. When you can invent your own community currency that can serve as an incentive tool for coordination and for contribution, like a wide network of people, that's a really unique tool that can really help bootstrap some of these networks. And that's like one of the huge challenges of co-ops is like, how do you bootstrap it? How do you fund it? It's really tough. The idea of a token serving as like a proxy for ownership or governance, I think has a lot of potential. It may not be perfect in the way that we've seen, but that's kind of like the argument in the article that I wrote, is like there are elements from both that I think combined between co-ops and DAOs that can build organizations that do have more egalitarian type voting and kind of like empower governance and financial upside for people contributing, but also like a way to resource these organizations and help them build the things they need to build and create impact.
This is where it gets really interesting for me. Because I know you've talked about the difficulty of funding co-ops, and you also talk about how it's really hard to get grants, right? Because co-ops are technically have to be for profit. Is that right?
Yeah, I say by and large, most every cooperative is like inherently a for-profit organization. So that's ends up being a pretty big disqualifier from most grants that typically give to nonprofits.
Why does it have to be a for-profit?
Don't ask me. I don't know. I think there are some progressive grant makers that will consider cooperatives, but it's very, very rare.
I mean, why do co-ops have to be for-profit?
Oh, well, generally, it's profit sharing. So like any surplus is distributed back to members in the form of dividends. So it feels like it's a way to actually run a profitable business and share in the upside. Just as like if you're a member of REI, the benefits that you get from being a member like go into your account like in the form of dividends.
Totally. Got it. That makes sense. So that's why it can't really be set up as a nonprofit, and that's why it's hard to get grants. So co-ops are in this like weird space where you can't get like the grants that would typically go to more community-led things that are more like nonprofits. But because of the structure as well, you can't really raise VC funding. Investors are a very small pool that would be interested in investing in a co-op in the first place. And so funding is really hard. And part of the reason this gets really interesting for me is I've worked now in community management for 15 years now, 15 years of working in community management, basically building community for companies, building companies that are community led. And it's funny just to see like this same narrative, like people who do this work of community building almost across the board are doing it for some sort of egalitarian, like wanting to create value for people help each other, very human centric work. but is trying to like fit into this mold of traditional capitalism where like, well, what's the ROI? What's the return?
Mm-hmm.
And so both community managers for companies that are like trying to get budget and buy-in have a hard time communicating like the value of the work they're doing. And community entrepreneurs or creators who are like building community independently as a business, also really hard to build up as a business. It's hard to fund. It's hard to monetize a community in the same way that you can monetize content or podcasts or other things. So it's interesting just to see the parallels between co-ops and like every form of community-led business that I've seen.
Right. I mean, this is why ownership is important. Like ownership drives interest, and interest of an investor who owns a startup is very different from a community that's using a product or service. And ownership is basically what drives incentives, which drives behaviors. So I could see community managers at kind of VC-backed startups having this kind of like dissonance of like wanting to empower and involve community members or create a sense of ownership or sense of belonging, but the actual like incentives and the responsibilities and the rewards and all the upsides of ownership don't exist.
Huh. Yeah, you just articulated something that's been bubbling in my head for a while. It's like the difference between a sense of ownership and actual ownership. And like that dissonance kind of sums up my career.
Yeah, I mean, but this feels like, I mean, at least what I've seen in the DAO space is encouraging. And I like, if you've been in the same space as I've been and you've probably seen it, just how much, you know, like giving real, like upside, real governance power to people that are providing value. You know, it's real value that any member of a community is providing to that organization. So it would make sense to capture that and sharing it together. And it feels just like a natural way to build companies that will end up winning in the end by having a broad base of empowered owners.
So let's talk more about DAOs. Where are DAOs bringing or solving for some of the problems that co-ops have struggled with? Funding is one. Maybe we could talk about that. Are there other elements of co-ops that DAOs are solving for?
I think it comes down to like funding and scale. So at the, you know, if you go to the platform cooperativism conferences at New School University, you'll find a lot of professors talking about theory, and you'll find like social entrepreneurs and cooperative entrepreneurs that just cannot get past this funding problem. So it feels like this like hierarchy of needs that like you can't even begin to really think about thoughtfully engaging a community or scaling it until you just like are able to breathe, have like oxygen for this organization. Like so the for like a confluence of reasons, it's very interesting to me that like DAOs largely have very little financial constraints, sometimes even none to a degree. And so the idea of like a token that could serve as this tool to drive resources and help create like scale real ownership, that is something that like I haven't seen a cooperative be able to easily do. And the nature of like a token as like a proxy for ownership is so fluid as well. I mean, there's definitely a lot of weird dynamics that can be created with this, but I feel optimistic in that these these models of token ownership should be explored much more. So we can basically take kind of like the ideas of cooperatives or tech-based cooperatives and actually allow them room to grow, like give them tools so that a network can bootstrap itself. What I would like to see is less reliance on venture capital. That's my personal gripe with the space, the DAO space right now is like, this is an entirely new like set of law of physics for organizations. So it doesn't make sense to treat venture capital as this law of nature that everyone has to follow. So I would like to see more people form like these token enabled or coordinated organizations in explicit opposition to venture capital. Like take community ownership to like the fullest degree possible, and not be seduced by venture capital, because you have this incredible tool of this community token or community currency that can go really far.
Right. And real quick, just could you give us like a quick primer on how are DAOs funded? Like how does token ownership translate into funding for the organization as a whole?
Well, if there is like one, it could be investors basically doing some kind of swap, like swapping a USDC stablecoin for X amount of tokens. If a token is on an exchange like Uniswap, kind of like anyone could purchase it or sell through this kind of like decentralized automated market maker. So it's like a very fluid form of ownership. Like if you want to buy friends benefits tokens, you can just do that off of Uniswap, basically.
Right.
And that the result of that is if more people want to buy in, then the people that have been growing value for the organization, like their tokens end up being worth more as well.
Right.
And that, because if something like that can be imbued with value, then it becomes like a really, really useful tool to drive contributions without kind of the need of traditional capital. This is, I think this is like a pretty leftist idea, or could be like looked at as that, like in terms of solidarity networks of local currencies, people creating their own community currencies. So many of the examples that we've seen are kind of just like internalized this neolib application of these ideas. But I do think, like through the lens of solidarity economics, community currencies, like these aren't like inherently like libertarian or capitalist ideas.
Right. Makes sense. And so I'm just wrapping my head around it too. So a DAO will like launch and essentially have X amount of tokens that the DAO owns, and they would put a certain amount up for sale that people can buy, and that's essentially how it fundraises originally. And then they retain a number of tokens as well that now holds value, and they can use those. That's the treasury, right? That they now use to fund all the different programs.
That way, like, or often just individuals that get tokens through contributing to a network can actually be the ones providing liquidity for this. I mean, it gets pretty heady, but at the end of the day, it's just like people coming together to kind of like create this market for this community currency that was invented, but at the same time can be like a proxy for real ownership.
Yeah, it's still hard to wrap my head around, like, because the tokens are both used as compensation, it's used as ownership and governance, and it's used as like a fundraising mechanism and an investment mechanism for people that can buy and sell on it. So it's like used in all these different ways, and it's confusing.
Yeah, no, it is confusing because it's so new,
Yeah.
and everyone's figuring it out. Like, I don't think that anyone's found the perfect model yet. Groups like Friends Benefits, as interesting as I find them, I think have like a pretty imperfect model of the requirements to buy in.
Mm-hmm.
It seems problematic too that a contributor might have to sell their ownership in order to pay rent
Exactly.
potentially.
Yeah.
So there are definitely these challenges, but what I see is a lot of good faith, hopeful, constructive people that are kind of building out in the open. And so, if anything, I wouldn't advocate for like a particular model or say one group is doing it perfectly, or saying that just DAOs are incredible in all instances. It's just that there's a ton of design space to explore here, and kind of like imbue with the values that we want. Just
Mm.
feels very wide open, and so like I'm in favor of just open exploration.
Mm. Do you have a personal take on what the ideal model is for a DAO, or like what's your stance today on if you are starting another DAO now, like what is the model that makes the most sense?
Well, I think being as egalitarian as possible, um, um, onboarding membership through contributions. Um, I think that having membership not be based on necessarily on a kind of like ERC20 fungible token to something that may look more just like a membership card, like an NFT that serves as membership. Um, and yeah, I think like a way that has clear ways that people can earn or participate their way within an organization, and doesn't gatekeep, or lock people out because of need, or price. So yeah, I think again, I'm digging into literature and trying to think of the best ways to kind of uh, capture all these ambitions. But I think in general, it's just um, this intention to just create a fair, egalitarian organization with membership that is robust, ambitious, and carries real weight.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Do you think it's smart for an existing established community to convert itself into a DAO or to tokenize itself, or is it better like is starting from scratch pretty important that model is built into the system from day one?
I think we'll see interesting examples of this being tried. As an example, this was something that I had been looking at going through Seed Club. I do believe that it's kind of hard to turn those gears backwards, and it might be easier to start like just with a Web3 native model from
Yeah.
the beginning. But I'm sure we'll see successful examples of it. It does feel more challenging than kind of like starting from the beginning as a Web3 based organization. I think in large part, it might not be as much of a structural challenge as it is a challenge of kind of like education within a community, like a level of familiarity with Web3 tools, and acceptance of this as like a model. I think for good reason. Um, people see a lot of things that make them nervous about anything crypto related, and
Mm-hmm.
aren't fully bought in to this concept. So totally see that and like forgive that. And but I just think, yeah, it's at this point in time, it's probably much easier to just like start with a Web3 native model.
Yeah, that makes sense. And last question before our rapid fire question round.
Mm.
For people who build community, who are community managers, what does community management look like in a DAO? What is like the scope of work of a community professional within the context of a DAO?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with um, education, like diminishing any kind of informational asymmetry that would exist between the team and other groups or other stakeholders. I think it's creating paths to become as involved as someone would like to be, but also allowing people to have the freedom to just be like a passive member. So, some people may be really interested in going to meetings and thinking about governance and becoming a board representative. Other people are just like, I just want to use this website, but I really like that it's a cooperative.
Yeah.
So I think creating both of those paths is important. And I think there's like an extra burden of clarity among community members or community managers within a a collectively owned organization, if it's like a co-op or a DAO.
And so our community managers generally, they the ones responsible for managing governance and voting and snapshots and those aspects of DAOs as well, or are they more focused on the human engagement and managing, online spaces like Discord? Does this? It feels like the scope might be a lot larger for community professionals in DAOs than it is in like a Web2 company.
Right. Yeah, I think that the role of a community manager is often limited to people thinking about social media manager. But I think it has like a much greater role within an organization that's collectively owned by people. To a large degree, I think that leaders of these organizations are community managers as well. That it's like I feel like it's a unique form or like style of leadership that makes someone successful. Like someone that's internalized kind of like traditional startup, like hierarchical management styles is probably not going to run a collectively owned organization very well. So I think like a lot of it's like this challenge is very personal and tough for people of like letting go of the reins and being comfortable with things going in a different direction or vision than maybe one person had planned. So I think like this like idea of community management goes all the way to the top, and it like is a very different style of leadership for sure.
Yeah, it kind of seems like community is everything in a DAO, and there's like just different kinds of community roles within that. I have to ask one more question now because you brought it up, like this idea of being comfortable with the direction changing and the community is making decisions. The community is defining what the business will do and how it will do it. We had this debate in Seed Club. I don't remember if you shared your opinion or not, but I'm curious what your take is on should a DAO or co-op, I guess. Do you feel like it's better for it to come in with a clear idea of this is a product we're building and this is a problem we're solving, versus what we're seeing in a lot of DAOs is more of an open approach of it's more of like we're going to bring this group of people together who have shared values and interests and just let them decide what to do and what to build?
Yeah, I think this is something that does not come naturally for anyone that's like has a history in traditional startups, but it's what I find the most interesting is how community can be its own product in itself. So you can start with kind of like values or like a shared vision or like a flag that people are attracted to, like a kind of like collective culture, and then kind of like flipping this product development lifecycle upside down, where instead of one person or like a small team building a product, and you build a community around that product, that you could start in the other direction, start with a community, and the community can diligence and come up with ideas and help build with, by, and for the community, like products that serve its own needs and can serve other people's needs too. So this is one thing that I think is really cool about Friends with Benefits is, they have several products that they've made or are working on that could be successful standalone startups in themselves. And like one is a product called Gatekeeper, which is a way of token gating ticketed access to physical events. That's something I think could be like a really big standalone company. But that idea was really only sourced by its own community to serve its own needs. And just starting with a group of people and then, a story and a concept and then growing products from there is like a very unintuitive way to do things. But I feel like it actually can yield really interesting results and successful products.
I wonder if I'm just one of those startup archetypes who's just been in this world too long. Because I'm of two minds. On one hand, I love the idea of community ownership, of empowerment, of letting community decide what to do, of true ownership, not just a sense of ownership. On the other side, I've also been in startups and tech for 15 years, built multiple companies. I've seen how hard it is to build a startup that works and to stay focused. And like FWB is an interesting example where Gatekeeper's one path. I don't think they charge for Gatekeeper today, but in any case, they could turn that into a business, and that's a pretty good product. But it's also launching like a coffee subscription right now, and there's a team launching a coffee subscription, and like each of these programs cost money, like pull from the treasury to essentially build out these things, and like I can't help but feel skeptical or worried that like spreading the organization across completely disparate products and tools and things, just like whatever the community wants to do, is going to be really hard to maintain that focus that it really takes to build a sustainable and successful company. And as you draw from the treasury over and over again to launch these projects, like it's fine now because FWB is backed by Andreessen, like there's a ton of money in the bank, but like as that money slowly disappears over time, at some point there becomes okay, we're running out of money. We have to build something that will be financially sustainable and successful. And then it starts to feel like a regular Web2 company again.
Right. Yeah. We'll buckle up and see how it goes, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm not so skeptical that I'm not getting off the ride. I'm very, very interested to see where it all goes. All right. Well, on that note, I think we're ready for our rapid fire question round. Austin, are you ready? I'm going to ask you questions. You're going to answer them as rapidly as you can.
Okay, cool. Let's go.
All right. First question. What's your favorite book to give as a gift to others?
I mentioned this book before, but Ours to Hack and to Own was kind of like what got me thinking about ownership differently. It's free online. If you Google Ours to Hack and to Own, you can find a PDF. So that's what I recommend.
Nice. Ours to Hack and to Own. Cool. I'm definitely going to pick that up.
Cool.
This is a site. This is a quote that is on your site. I'm curious what it means to you. Once upon a time, people were born into communities and had to find their individuality. Today, people are born individuals and have to find their communities. This is a quote from K-Hole in Use Mode.
Yeah. It's hard to digest this in a rapid fire, but I think it's at MetaLabel, the project that I'm focusing on now. We kind of like center this quote a lot, and I think it's just a way to think about how we used to find communities that we like didn't necessarily choose, but we just landed in like church or family. But now the internet kind of allows us to find all the other weirdos that are just like us. And so we have this kind of a freedom to find people just like us. These are our communities, and we like have to kind of find them rather than being born into them.
Yeah. Yeah. When I saw that quote, I had like a oh shit moment. That was another one. I was like, that kind of sums up a lot of what's been bubbling in my head over the last 15 years. So I really liked it. I'm going to be referencing it often. Next question. What's one community engagement technique or conversation starter that you like to use in your communities?
One thing that I did with Ampled quite a bit was just give everyone my phone number, and just say
That's one way to do it.
or call whenever. So any artist that was signing up, I would just make a point to hop on the phone on a weekend, just talk for an hour. And I've had heard many people just tell other people like, "Oh yeah, you can talk. Austin will talk to you on the
Just
phone."
text
It's
Austin.
really cool. Yeah. Not something that scales very easily, but I think that like doing something like that just is meaningful. It feels better than a Calendly link for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Did you just use your real number or use like a service or something to manage that?
Yeah.
Bold.
It's in my
I like
email. Yeah. My email signature. Just text me.
Love it. I'm going to test it later. Who's an up and coming musician or artist that you're all about right now?
I'm going to see a show tomorrow. I'm going to see Rose Hotel play at a house venue called Cat Farm, and Rose Hotel is on Ampled as an artist owner. So yeah, really enjoy Rose Hotel, and I'm based in New York. Typically listen to punk music, so I really like Crime Watch and Show Me the Body as well. Those are both like local New York bands.
Dope. Awesome. We'll check them out. Who in the world of community would you most like to take out for lunch?
Bernie Sanders.
Nice. Ready to feel the burn.
Yeah.
Love it. What habit has had the most positive impact on your life?
I adopted a dog, which like is like has a lot of habits associated with it, like going on walks. And I mean, nothing better. I don't know if it's a habit or just like a really awesome thing, but yeah, during COVID, nothing better than having a dog and kind of like have that shape your day.
Yeah, I had a baby during COVID, so similar.
Yeah.
Probably higher waves of highs and lows, or positive and negative impact, but mostly positive.
Right.
Lots of new habits, that's for sure. What's the weirdest community you've ever been a part of?
Part of me thinks, like the early or the mid-aughts, like Brooklyn DIY scene, where people were just forming illegal venues in random spaces. Like, there's a venue called Bodega that was in the basement of a bodega. There was a venue called Above the Auto Parts Store, which was above an auto parts store.
They're all very descriptive.
Yeah. Yeah, either that or when I was in college, I worked at a vintage clothing store called Beacon's Closet, which everyone there was in a band and had full access to whatever clothes they want. So everyone dressed like a maniac, and that was a fun time.
I love it. Those are great ones. All right, if you could only eat one food for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Easy nachos, for sure.
Nachos.
Yeah.
Very, very healthy. Can you sustain? Can you live on just nachos?
Yeah.
Guess it depends what you dip it in.
Yeah, for sure.
What's a community product that you wish existed?
Some of the products that do exist, I think are really cool that are emerging. Mirror, I like Mirror. I like some of the tools like OX splits, which is like a permissionless protocol to like split money or income from sales in like a Web3 way. Drips by Radical is really cool.
What does that do?
It's like Web3 native subscriptions, so like streaming payments. Those seem like really cool Legos. But yeah, I also am just interested in seeing more organizations where like the community is the product and seeing how that develops.
Yeah, love that. And you mentioned Mirror as well. It's a popular tool in Web3. It does like a bunch of different things, right? It's not just like one product.
Yeah, it's like a really well-rounded collaboration tool for publishing, crowdfunding, creating like a marketplace for NFTs. It does a bunch of stuff.
Yeah, awesome. All tools that you should check out if you're interested in DAOs. And last question, if you were to find yourself on your deathbed today and you had to condense all of your life lessons into one piece of advice, what would that advice be?
I like fully don't feel qualified to answer this question.
That's good advice.
I would say that like if I could glean any like personal experience is that I've probably benefited from like being better at unlearning kind of like traditional ways of viewing status, like outside of kind of like money or materialism, and having like a very high a tolerance for being misunderstood, which is like I guess you kind of need if you're gonna start like something like Ampled or like a cooperative platform. So yeah, I think leaning into that is good. I do feel like having the guts to do cool stuff just results in cool stuff happening. Just very, I don't, that's not a very elegant way. So, this is
Those
me
are
on my
great
deathbed.
answers.
Just like rambling on my deathbed.
Yeah, he must be losing his shit. He's not making any sense anymore. Well, I really like having a high tolerance for being misunderstood. That's like a very unique way of saying like be yourself. Like I never liked that advice, but I like the idea of having a high tolerance, like being okay with being misunderstood, because that kind of gives you permission to do things that are out of the norm and that feel true to you.
Right. Yeah.
So that was great advice.
Word.
Next podcast, you're going to be ready to go.
Yeah.
Awesome. And lastly, where can people go to continue to learn from you and check out MetaLabel and the different projects you're working on?
You can follow me on Twitter. It's Austin Robey _ It's ROBEY. And you can check out MetaLabel.xyz and follow MetaLabel on Twitter as well.
Awesome. Well, Austin, this was really, I mean, I feel like I could just talk to you for several more hours if I had that time. I'm just, you open up so many ideas for me and also help me understand a lot of things in a really unique way. And even when I read your article, it just felt like a breath of fresh air to see someone thinking really thoughtfully and critically about Web3, not in a way that's overly judgmental, but also not like blindly optimistic. And I think there's so many things that Web3 is unnecessarily reinventing the wheel around, whether it's what we can learn from co-ops, what we can learn from open source, what we can learn from community management. And, you've clearly and quickly become a voice of transferring some of those lessons and being a bridge into this new space. So just really grateful for the work you're doing, the wisdom you're sharing, the projects that you're working on, and really appreciate you coming on the podcast and sharing some of that with me today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I do think that like I'm a Web3 believer, not necessarily religious about it, but I think like I'm encouraged by things that I'm seeing, and maybe for any like skeptics out there, just it's fine. But also like there are really cool communities doing cool stuff. So I would just end with that.
Yeah, have a high tolerance for being misunderstood.
Right.
Awesome. Well, thanks, man. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.